The story begins with a basic human vulnerability: thirst. Jesus' long journey coming back from Jerusalem, instead of his going around Samaria, either following the Jordan River Valley or the other way, the plains along the coastline, goes through Samaria, and he's thirsty. And he meets another human being there who is thirsty. They share that vulnerability in common. This Word that became flesh to dwell among us is thirsty. That's a very important detail for our theology of who is Jesus Christ. God does not come and rescue us from our humanity. God becomes human flesh and walks with us. And so Jacob's well was there where they met. And Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. And a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and he said to her, "Give me a drink. I have a need, just like the need that you have." The need that we all share. Now, the passage says that this living water that Jesus eventually promises, it springs up. And you, if we're paying attention, thought, then why was Brad pouring water downward on the kids? This was just more fun with the kids than trying to get a fountain. But we all need water. And yet there's a woman who is there who has needs beyond water. And Jesus connects with her. He says, "I will give you living water." And she's not sure what he's talking about. And again, just like in the story with Nicodemus, there's this approach where something gets revealed. Jesus says something, it makes no sense, leads to more confusion, more questions. And just as Jesus said to Nicodemus, "This is what I mean." He says to the woman at the well, "This is what I mean. This is who I am. I am the living water." At the well, we learn that people who travel through other lands share vulnerabilities with the people who live in those lands. Both the immigrant and the legal citizen share thirst. That is what we have in common. Jesus does not capitalize on that need in order to gain power, in order to oppress, but he instead places himself beneath, subject to the will of the person who is seen as the other. What happens to the migrant happens to the citizen. What happens to the alien in our land will eventually happen to us. How we treat the other matters. It may seem like a selfish motivation, I'll treat you well so that I can flourish, but at least that's a great start for looking at how the world works. Jesus goes on in Matthew's gospel to tell us something about thirst. "Where were you when I was thirsty, and you did not give me a drink?" Jesus says, "Whatsoever you do to the least of these," when you give drink to someone who's thirsty, "you do it unto me." It's not just that what happens to the alien eventually may bounce back and happen to us. It's how we treat the other is how we are treating God in Jesus Christ. And that matters to us. In the story, not only is there this physical need, we all need water, but now there are rules about who gets water and when can they have it. Social rules. Remember, in a previous sermon, we were talking about the importance of when something happens. In the 11th hour, after the work is done, there's still a little bit of sunlight, but the day is over. When Nicodemus would visit at night, when it's dark. This story, again, pays attention to the time. It happens at high noon. When do you want to be going out on a long journey to get buckets or cisterns of water and carry them? Not at high noon, the hottest point perhaps in the day. You want to be doing it in the morning. But this woman comes at noon because she's a social outcast. She's gone through so many husbands that she's just not socially acceptable. We didn't read that part of the story. We stopped before it, but a lot of you remember that detail about her. She's not going to the well with the other women of the community early in the morning when it's cool. She has to go later to avoid whatever gossip, whatever condescending comments may come. She comes at noon, and that's when Jesus meets her. What happens to the woman at the well is going to happen to Jesus. Jesus doesn't have any mechanism for getting water out of that well. But the woman who comes along at noon does. Jesus sees value in her. He could have hated her because that's what his people socialized him to do growing up. Hate the Samaritans. Do not trust them. But he knows how you treat the alien is how eventually you're going to be treated. It is easy for us to hate the people who do not look like us, sound like us. We can, with the power that we have, treat them like they're nobodies. We can drag children out in the freezing cold as bait. We can drag elderly men out in the cold winter for photo opportunities in order to remind the world that we have the power and you do not. Jesus said to the woman at the well, "Give me a drink." Not only do we have rules about who's allowed to have water and when they have to get it, but we have these differences that are religious and political. Jesus' disciples are just scandalized that Jesus says, "Give me a drink." That he would even talk with the enemy. He should be hating them. It is easy for us to weaponize religion. It is easy for us to weaponize politics so that we can fuel our hate. To live in a world where we hate the migrant workers who rescue us from doing back-breaking harvesting. We live in a world where we can hate, look down on people of color who work in jobs to change the diapers of our elderly, frail parents so that we don't have to. We live in a world where we can hate the people of color who drive transport trucks to make sure that goods make it to our shelves so that when I want to go in at some odd hour and get what I need from the grocery store, it's there. What a horrible world we live in, where we can find justification to hate the people who do the things we don't want to do. And we live in a horrible world where we can use religion to justify that, and we can use politics to justify that. Jesus didn't hate on this woman. He treated her exactly the same way he did when he met Nicodemus in the middle of the night. Someone who was of high status, someone who was desirable, someone who was a leader. He explained to Nicodemus, this is who I am, and this is what you're missing. And Nicodemus went away confused when he told this outcast, this enemy, who he was. She believed, and she ran and she told all of her community what she had encountered, this living water. This story about Jacob's well, I think, is just so powerful because it, in its storyline, calls out how in Jesus' day, religion and politics is being used to justify hate. The Samaritans, because of their occupation, developed their understanding of the Torah. It was different than the way that the people of Jerusalem did. They had different places of worship, so they had these religious differences. They were politically different. But at that well, Jesus and this woman, who doesn't get a name, are part of the same family that goes back to the person who was renamed from Jacob to, do you remember what new name he got from God? Israel. They're there at this well where Israel begins, and they are the same. There's no logic in hate in that location, because if you hate the other, you're hating yourself. What happens to the other eventually happens to us. No matter what may happen politically and historically, to divide us because the world wants power, those borders are completely artificial to water that flows. These borders, these worldly borders, are completely artificial to a God who comes in flesh and dwells among us. The opposite of discipleship is just a fancy way of saying being a follower of Jesus Christ. The opposite of being a follower of Jesus Christ is weaponizing the faith. If you want to completely stray from being a follower of Jesus Christ, use your religion to justify hating the person who breaks their back so that we don't have to. If you want to be the opposite, if we want to be the opposite of followers of Jesus Christ, use our religion to hate the people who clean the messes that we think are beneath us. If we want to completely dismiss what it means to follow Jesus Christ, then skim through scriptures and concoct arguments that justify hating the people who make sure that we have the convenience of food. The opposite of being a follower of Jesus Christ is turning faith into a weapon. That's not what Jesus calls us to do. Let me end with these questions. Who is the person that we just silently hate? Who are the peoples that we look down upon? Who do we avoid contact with in our world? They don't deserve the look. Who do you benefit from, but you never thank them because you're never in the same space with them? Who do we rely on for labor, but we hate on them, and we got all kinds of names for them? Jesus said, "I am the living water." And he marched from the most important person he could meet down on through dangerous roads to meet the least important person that he could meet. And he said, "I am yours. Follow me."